Okay, good evening, everyone. Hope everyone is doing well. Tonight we're learning Maseches Eruvin Daf Kavches. We're starting at the bottom of Chav Zayin Amud Beis, right before the middle width line, so about 12 lines or so from the bottom, beginning with the words B'mai Kamiflagei. Before we start, I just wanted to share some Divrei Hakdama that we're going to be learning tonight about features of the hermeneutical principles, like the famous Klal U'Prad U'Klal. We're going to be learning about that tonight. And as well, one that's referred to as Riba Mi'et V'Riba, which is one that we don't really regularly use. It's not included in Rabbi Shmuel, which is interesting to note. And the reason I wanted to begin with a highlight on this is because while it's true that it may sound very nuanced, and it is, and while sometimes it may even fall as less interesting, this is the only lens with which the Chachamim looked through the Psukim to get to Dinei D'Oraisa. Like what we see in the Moni HaMitzvos, that's because of the hermeneutical principles. And they had this Masorah, as it were. They had a real Masorah as to how to look at Psukim properly to result with a mitzvah D'Oraisa. So I just wanted to prime our brains a little bit as we begin this these next till almost to the middle of the Amud on Kavches Amud Aleph to learn two different approaches. Again, Riba Mi'et V'Riba, and then again Klal U'Prad U'Klal. I just don't want to get lost in the weeds alone. Sometimes it's easy to do that here, but I want to just make sure the bigger picture is still spot on, which is that this is how the Chachamim taught us how to extract Dinei D'Oraisa from Psukim. So let's begin. We're 2 lines before the middle width lines, about 12 lines from the bottom. B'mai kamiflagei, Rabbi Yehuda ben Gadish, Rabbi Eliezer, B'hani tanoi dilakaman. There was a machlokas between these two groups, Rabbi Yehuda ben Gadish, Rabbi Eliezer on one side, and the tanoi dilakaman. And what were they arguing about? So before we do that, let's look at Rashi. Rashi, Dibur Hamaschel b'mai kamiflagei, about 3/4 of the way down. Dibur Hamaschel b'mai kamiflagei, Rabbi Yehuda v'Rabbi Eliezer, De'amrei tarvaihu. They both said, Dugin, Nikhin, Uvitzir hu depligi. They agreed in regards to fish that they could be used as an eruv. Remember our context. We're talking about what can be used as an eruv for eruv beitchumin, eruv chatzeros. We saw that Rashi yesterday. And then Bahani Tanai de Lakaman, the Darshe Primi Privi Gedule Karka, Bivlad Vlados Haaretz, we're going to see what all of that means. Vitarvaihu Mimate Dagim Vikol Shekain Sir. So here's our machlokes. Do we say, like Rabbi Yehuda, it's not Rabbi Yehuda, who is it? Rabbi Yehuda ben Gadish and Rabbi Eliezer, that fish are considered to be part of an eruv, or do we say no, that they are not allowed to be part of an eruv like the other Tanaim? So that's the question, is B'mai Kamiflagei. So says the Rabbanan, and let's get into the exegetical portions of tonight. First of the middle width lines, Rabbi Yehuda ben Gadish, Rabbi Eliezer, Darshe, Ribuye Umiute. They look at Psukim with a ribui and a miut perspective, that they are able to say that some things can be included and some things can be excluded. So let's get started with how they understand things. There we see a riba, an inclusive language of b'chol asher taven nafshecha. But then the pasuk drills down a layer and says, Babakar uvatson uvayayin uvashechar. We analyzed this yesterday, the famous question Rabbi Yochanan asked, which is, why do we have the word bakar? And if you can answer the question of why we have the word bakar in the Torah, I'll carry your clothes with you to the mikvah. Remember that question we dealt with yesterday. So we have a riba and we have a miut, and then uvechol asher tishalcha nafshecha chazar v'riba. So we have a riba and we have a miut and we have another riba. Riba umid v'riba. Riba hakol. What does it mean, riba hakol? My Rabbi, what's included? Rabbi kol mile. It's a very inclusive language. Umay miyet, what was being excluded? The Rabbi Eliezer miyet sir. Rabbi Yehuda ben Gadish miyet mayim v'melach. Here we have the machlokes of whether or not we exclude sir, we exclude fish fry. And Rashi highlighted this already. The Rabbi Eliezer and Rabbi Yehuda ben Gadish, even though they're on the same side of the fence in regards to fish itself, the fish can be used as an eruv, but within their world, within their camp, that a fish can be used as an eruv, but still there we would say that there's a machlokes in regards to tzir between the two of them. The Rabbi Yehuda ben Gadish, mi'et ma'im u'melach. Rabbi Yehuda ben Gadish was more lenient. He allowed for tzir, but what was excluded by the mi'et in between the two ribas? What was excluded when it drilled down to say bakar and son and yain and shechar? So there, what was excluded is ma'im u'melach, and that's how their world understands dagim. Very good. The hani tanoi. What about the other tanoim? Darshe klale uprate. Instead of doing a ribui and a miut, they do klal uprat. And let's see, we're going to see that there's a nafkamina between these two momentarily. Titania, the Brisa writes, V'nasata kesef b'chol asher ta'aven nafshecha klal. That's a general word, a general language. Babakar batzon v'yaynu v'ashechar prat. Uv'chol asher tishalcha nafshecha chazar uklal. And this is, as the Gemara writes explicitly, klal upratu klal, iyatadan ela ke'ena parat. We know that we have this principle that when you have a pasuk that goes from general to specific to general, that our theme has to follow the prat, the specific. Iyatadan ela ke'ena prat. Anything that's included has to follow a theme. So what is the theme? And I'll just pause here to highlight, this is the difference between riba u'mi'et v'riba. That by riba u'mi'et v'riba, we don't have a rule that it has to follow the prat. But by klal u'pratu klal, iyatadan ela ke'ena prat. So there we have that nuance that we don't have by riba mi'et riba. So let's see what is this common denominator of all things that can be included in the klal u'pratu klal. We'll see here that there are two answers. Maha prat mefurash pri v'gidula karka. Just like the prat. What was the prat in our pasuk? The animals, right? It was bakar, tzon, and then yain and shechar. Those are pri. They are derivatives of another thing. V'gidule karka, and they grow from the ground. That's not true. First of all, are you considering a sheep to be pri? And are you considering gidule karka to be a cow? How are you looking at these pratim? So that we need Rashi for. Rashi, 5 lines from the bottom of the page. Rashi says, Dibur hamaschil v'gidule karka, one above. Pri, egel nolad me'imo. Yes, we consider animals to be pri. And that's what Rashi says here. V'chein seh, ve'anavim mechartzanim. The same is true by a seh, and the same is true by grapes that are derived from chartzanim. They're derived from bunches of grapes, shezor and hachartzanim. V'gidule karka, shekula nizonin ugdelen mina karka. Doesn't mean that they were born from the ground. It means that their sustenance comes from the ground. And that, says the Gemara, version 1, is how we understand the prat of the klal u'pratu klal. When the pasuk was mefaret in detail, bakar, tzon, yain, and shechar, what is the root of that? So that is what the Gemara here writes on 2 levels, pri, and gidule karka. So that's the common denominator. Then, af kol pri v'gidule karka. Therefore, anything that can be included in that shall be included in that. And that is, as we'll see soon, what the difference is between the 2 opinions. V'tanya idach, another brisa explains what the prat actually comes to teach. 4 lines from the bottom on Chav Zayin and Beis. V'tanya idach, maha prat mefurash vlados haaretz. Just like the prat, the details in the pasuk, these 4 things in the middle, bakar, tzon, yain, and shechar, those 4 things, they're mefurash vlados haaretz. Vlados haaretz. What does that mean? Take a look at Rashi. 4 lines from the bottom of the page. Dibur hamaschil vlados haaretz shenivreu min haaretz b'maaseh breshis. A very limited term. You have to go back to the Psukim and Breshis and see what animals were created on every day and what animals were not, which ones were created on the ground and which ones were not. Then, so too, af kol vlados haaretz. This would then apply to all things that were part of Maaseh breshis. My beinaihu. What's the difference between these 2 approaches? The pri, and the approach of vlados. So says the Gemara as follows. 2 answers. Amar Abaye, dagim ika beinaihu. This is mamish, the distinction between them. What's the nafkamina? Lamanda amar pri v'gidule karka. According to the one who says that it has to be something that derives from another thing and something that gets its sustenance from the ground. Hani dagim gidule karka ninu. There we would even consider fish to be gidule karka. Take a look at the last Rashi on the page. Dibur hamaschil dagim. Rashi says gidule karka ninu kasavar shadagim nizonin mina karka. Now we may know a little better that fish eat tiny other little fish or other things that grow. They may eat some things that grow on the ground. But here, seemingly, this version of the Gemara assumes that fish are nizon min hakarka, that they get their sustenance from the ground. However, last line, Lamanda Amar vlados haaretz dagim mimaya ivru. If you say that it has to be something that was created during Maaseh breshis on the ground, fish were not created on the ground. A total uproot of the evolutionary theory that fish might have started one place and moved to another. We can discuss that never probably within a Daf Yomi frame. Good topic to discuss. But nevertheless, we see here that fish clearly were created in water only. So that's the distinction that the Gemara says. So then this was Abaye's answer that he gave this nafkamina, this ikabeinahi. Then the Gemara asks against Abaye's answer. Umi Amar Abaye Dagim Gidule Karka Ninhu. You just tried to tell me that fish were possibly Gidule Karka. But if fish were Gidule Karka, then we have a problem. The Amar Abaye says as follows. Achal potisa loke arba. What is potisa? Rashi, di Ramaskal potisa. Sheretz hamayim katan she'ein bo kezais. It's a small animal, and you're going to be held accountable with malkos, 4 different sets of lashes. Why? It's less than a kezai. So Rashi here introduces a concept that we'll speak about at length throughout Shas. I believe we mentioned it once or twice since we started. Ve'afilu hachi, even though it's not a kezai, kevan de beryahi achilahi, that even though it's not a shear, but a beria is something that is its own entity. That's why, for example, people buy bodek broccoli, because we check it in a way where there are no whole bugs inside of there. Because even though it's probably the case, if you're eating a kazais of bugs, you should see them, right? That's a lot of bugs. But the fact that you can't see them doesn't mean that it's not a beria. So if a bug has the status of a beria, so then even if you stuck it in a blender, doesn't make a difference. You can't be mavatal a beria. You're not allowed to do that. So therefore, what the Gemara is saying here is in regards to a potisa, this sea creature, a small sea creature, it has loke arba. It has malkos times 4. Top of kaf ches med aleph, end of the first line, nimala, some type of small animal. In modern Hebrew, we translate nimala as an ant. Not so clear that that's what's happening here. Take a look at Rashi, 6 lines down, dibra maschal nimala, shu sheretz haaretz loke hey. And Rashi then details what all of the 5 are. Now, to distinguish between the potisa and the namala is that one of the reasons why the number is different between 4 and 5 is that there's a separate isser to eat a land animal. What do we see about the potisa that is not a land animal? It's only 4. Namely, it doesn't have the isser of achila of something that's a sheretz on the ground. What does that show you? Fish is not nizon mina karka. What does that show you? Abaye, how can you say fish are nizon mina karka? So the Gemara is bothered by that. And then finishing up the brisa, also as well, that a tzira, a hornet, is lokeshesh, they get 6. Ve'imisa. If what you're saying, Abaye, is correct, that really fish are gidule karka, then potisa nami lilke mishum sheretz hasharetz al haaretz. We should have had another Isser Malkos. You only listed 4 here, but you left out the one. If we read Rashi in detail, we don't have time for that. But if we read Rashi in full here, we'd see that what was missing was the Isser Malkos for something that grows on the land. The haraya, that fish don't benefit from the land. Beautiful kasha against Abaye. Therefore, we pivot and change away from Abaye. Ela Amar Ravina, no. What's the difference between these 2 brisas that we saw on the bottom about how we define the prat in the klalu pradu klal? The first one said X, the second one said Y. We said, what's the difference? We said, maybe the difference is going to be fish. Says Gemara, can't be fish. It has to be ophos. That's going to be our next attempt. Ela Amar Ravina, ophosika beinaihu. The difference between them is ophos. Lemanda Amar primi pri gidule karka hani nami gidule karka minhu. For those who say that they have to be primi pri, we know that birds deliver birds, right? They have eggs and they have other birds. We also know that they're gidule karka, that they benefit. The sustenance is from the ground. They eat worms. They forage in the grass. We see pigeons all the time. They're taking tiny little nothings out of the grass. So for sure they're gidule karka. So there we would for sure say that they're part of this as well. However, lemanda amar vlados haaretz hani ophos mina rakakni bru. So says the Gemara, not all birds were created on the ground. The assumption is that they were created from some soup, some type of mixture, some type of swampland on the ground. An interesting assumption in and of itself. Certainly not every bird was created in the days of creation, that we know for sure. That's why we have some shilas about what birds are allowed to be eaten, and now we don't have a Masorah on every bird. Fine. So it says the Gemara, man de marbe ophos, for the one who includes ophos, namely approach number 1, brisa number 1, mai taime, and also uman de mai ophos mai taime. What are the reasons why? What are the reasons that support each of these approaches? That version number 1, brisa number 1 says, we include ophos, again, within the camp of Ravina. This is approach number 2 to our how we understand the word prat. So there, Ravina says that the nafkamina between the brisas is birds. So why does one include birds and why does one exclude birds? It says the Gemara, man de marbe ophos, a quarter of the way down, kapches menala. According to the one who includes the ophos, who says that is gidule karka, because kasavar klala basra dafka. Now we're going to get into the weeds a little bit about klalu pradu klal. We might have thought that when you heard the language of klalu pradu klal, that the beginning is general, and the middle is a detail, and the end is general. Says the Gemara, no. The first klal and the last klal those can be treated, in fact, very differently. And says the Gemara that according to the Shita that Ofos should be included, that they are Gedulei Karka, that's because we focus on the second klal, on the klal basra. It's as if it's a prat uklal, nase klal musaf al haprat. It's as if you have a klal that is in addition to the prat. So what was the prat? The prat was bakar, tzon, yain, and shechar, and then we're adding the last klal to add in ofos. Visrabu who call mile, and we can include that in. V'ahani klal kama, and according to this approach, what does the first klal and the klal upratu klal do? Says the Gemara, v'ahani klal kama, the first klal is used the meute kol delo dami la mishnei tzadin. The first klal was not used to include ofos, but to exclude something that doesn't have both features of primi pri and gidulei karka. That's what mishnei tzadin means. It has to be both primi pri and gidulei karka. So very, very, very subtle nuance within the world of klal upratu klal, that the second klal is the ikar and not the first, which we've learned something important here, because in regards to klal upratu klal, the first klal is less klal than the second klal. The first klal kind of gives parameters, and the second klal can expand to include other things. So that's kind of a subtlety, again, within the world of klal upratu klal. That's all within Ravina, and according to the first brisa, that includes ofos. What about the other opinion within Ravina that does not include ofos? Ofos, and according to the one who excludes ofos, so there, kasavar klala kama dafka, there he holds, no, we only rely on the first klal. We only rely on the first klal, not the second one. It's basically a klal uprat, the ein bechlal ela mashe b'prat. And when you have a klal uprat, we follow the details of the prat. Therefore, we can't include a chicken, because what was the prat of the pasuk? Again, it was bakar, tzon, yain, and shechar. It doesn't say chicken. So therefore, according to approach number 2, brisa number 2 within Ravina's explanation, that we only focus on the first klal, that in turn looks like a klal uprat, and ein bechlal ela mashe b'prat, and therefore, because the prat, the details of the pasuk, these 4 categories of bakar, tzon, yain, and shechar, because they don't say chicken, so therefore they leave out chicken. Hani in midi acharina lo, only these can be included. V'ahani klala basra l'rabuye called the dami lamishlosh tzadin. And within this klal upratu klal, within the world of Ravina, within the klal upratu klal in the world of Ravina, and within the camp that says that ofos are not included, what is the second klal used for in the klal upratu klal? It's a brisa. The brisa says it's a klal upratu klal. You said you're going to use the first klal, so therefore we basically have a klal uprat. But l'maisa, you have to deal with the second klal. How do we deal with the second klal? It has to be similar in 3 ways. What are the 3 ways? It's primi pri, gidulei karka, and vlados haaretz. It's a blending of the 2 shitas here to say that the second klal limits us in a way where it has only things that have all 3 features of primi pri. It has to be parent-child. It has to be gedulei karka, where it's zan, where it benefits from the ground. And it has to be vlados haaretz, where it was part of my sebratius. And that brings us to the 2 dots here. In short, allow me to summarize, if you will. There's a big machlokas tanaim as to whether or not dagim are part of the world of Eruv, and maybe whether ofos are part of the world of Eruv, and all of the exegetical parts of what we just learned of riba, mi'ik, v'riba, and klal upratu klal, all of that was trying to explain to us a little bit of how we got, not a little bit, a lot of it, about how each person got to their shitas, and that brings us to the 2 dots approximately halfway down on Kav Ches Amud Aleph. Take a quick drink, sorry. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam she'akol nihye b'dvaro. We're about to learn a statement from the Amoraim that's going to take us until the end of today. This statement of the Amoraim seems pretty simple, but we will see that there's quite a bit of nuance and a number of questions to answer here. Amar Rav Yehuda mishmei de Rav Shmuel bar Shilas mishmei de Rav me'arvin be'pa'apuin uvechaglogos uvegod gedanios. These are 3 different types of vegetations, 3 different types of growths. We're going to get into the ones that are critical to us today. Aval. However, we are not allowed to make an eruv lo bechaziz below bechafnios. What are chaziz and chafnios? Take a look at Rashi, all the way toward the bottom, 3 lines into the wider lines of Rashi. Dibra masvel chaziz shachas shel tvua. It's a raw version of tvua shehu yarak. It's still green. The goes is in the ochlino. So it's in a raw form. It's not a normal food, so we cannot be ma'arev with that. Kafnios, says Rashi, tamarim raos shelo bishlu kol tzorkan. These are dates that just will never come to their full ripeness. So we have some vegetations that we are allowed to use, But when it comes to chaziz and when it comes to kafnio, says Rabbi Yehuda in the name of Rav through generations, we see that that's not allowed. So then ask the Gemara a few questions. Wait a minute. Uve gud gedanios mi me'arvin. Are we allowed to use gud gedanios to make an eruv? After all, v'hatanya, we learned in a brisa, gud gedanios, when it comes to this type of growth, this was some type of vegetation that had circular or spherical or circular types of a growth to it. That was its shape. Merube banim, if someone was able to have a lot of children, yochlu, he's allowed to eat it. Chasuche banim, but someone who wasn't able to have children, he wasn't allowed to eat it. Lo yochlu, because it was difficult for fertility. It was not a food that you could eat. Again, if a person was totally fertile with no complications at all, then it's fine. Being hukshu lazera, but if it became a hardened vegetation, then af merube banim lo yochlu, then no one's allowed to eat it. So the Gemara is bothered. You said that good gedanios could be used for an eruv, yet we see that at times it can't be eaten by anybody, even someone who's otherwise fertile and healthy. So it can't always be eaten. So it says the Gemara 3 answers. Here, Gemara, one answer is ashalo hukshu lazera umerube banim. Maybe we're talking about where it was not a hardened vegetation yet, and it's only for someone who knows that they're capable of having children. It's for anyone. Why is it for anyone? Not everything has to be shaykh to you. We saw that you can be ma'ariv with things that aren't shaykh to you. Did we not learn Didn't we learn that you can use an eruv? You can use an eruv for a nazir that's made out of wine, even though a nazir has an isser deraisa of wine, not only grapes and wine, but even mishras, as we will learn, that you can't even have a flavoring of it, nothing at all. You're totally limited. And also, Yisrael can have truma alma. What do we see? That even though it's true that for a nazir he can't have wine, but the rest of us can. So if we can be ma'are with yain by a nazir, then hachanami afal gav that even though it's true that, let's say, a person can't have children on the regular, that by that person that they're not allowed to have good gedanios, but the fact that it's chazi for someone, the fact that someone's allowed to eat it, the merube banim, so then it should be mutter to use it, just like we saw in our Mishnah. So that's answer number 2. By Seima, Kika Amar Rav, what was Rav talking about that Rabbi Yehuda quoted where the good gedanios are allowed to be ma'arvin? That was behandakuki madoi. This is talking about a very specific version of the good gedanios. Take a look at Rashi. Dibur Hamaschil, 6 lines from the bottom. Dibur Hamaschil, Handakuki Madoi. These are good gedanios sheba madai yafosein. These were a unique kind of good gedanios, which were better than the version that we think are problematic. So you have Rav's statement and you have a brisa, and you have to figure out which one is which. So Rav was talking about good gedanios that were yafos, that's fine, and of course you can be ma'ariv with that. And the brisa was speaking about the one that could cause for problems with fertility, and therefore that would be more problematic. Good. Uve chaziz lo. We define chazis, if you look back at Rashi, 3 lines into the wider lines of Rashi, we said that it's this early version of tvua, of grains, that's a little bit of a color green. Rashi says, you're not allowed to be ma'ariv with that. Why can you not make an eruv out of that? Says the Gemara, ve'amar Rav Yehuda amar Rav, kishos, which are shoots, ve'chaziz me'arvin bahen. Not only that, muvarchen alein borei priya adama. So we have another machlokes Rav with a brisa, even though we say Rav Tanu Palik, but still, it's a little much for Rav to have so many machlokos. Rav should not be arguing with this brisa. We're going to try to answer in kind. We don't like giving the answer Rav Tanu Palik. We're going to try to give a real, authentic answer. So says the Gemara, lo kasha, this brisa, it's not a brisa, it's Rabbi Yehuda Amar Rav, it's himself. It's a stira with Rav within Rav. Rav initially said that chaziz is not allowed. Here we say that it is allowed. So it says the Gemara, lo kasha, hamekame de asa Rav lebavel, alavasar de asa Rav lebavel. It depends. Before he went to Bavel, he had one shita. When he went to Bavel, he had another shita. He saw that it was being grown regularly there. Says the Gemara, so what? Even if he saw in Bavel that they were using this, it doesn't make a difference. Ube Bavel havi ruba de alma. All of a sudden, because something's happening in Bavel, that becomes the world standard. Why? Why would we assume such a thing? After all, Ve'atanya, writes the Brisa, Hapul ve'hasaora ve'hatilton shezaron liyerek, but ladaita eitzel kol adam. What do we see about things that are otherwise not grown for vegetation, but you chose to grow it for vegetation? Says the Gemara, don't really care about your opinion. But ladaita eitzel kol adam. The fact that you grew it for yerek doesn't make it a yerek. If I grow Reese's peanut butter cups as a yerek, but ladaita eitzel kol adam. It's a peanut. That's ridiculous. It's batla daito eitzol kol. Nobody eats it like that, and that's a bad example anyways. But figure an example of something that nobody would eat. You grow thorns to eat. Nobody eats thorns. Animals eat thorns. You grew it as vegetation. That's your problem. So why is it that Rav went to Bavel and now all of a sudden everything is perfect, that chaziz is now edible? Why? We're going to finish off this brayso, but our question has already been framed. We also learned ha-shachalayim v'ha-gargir. Shachalayim is cress. Gargir, Rashi here at the bottom says, oroga nechal bein zera uvein yerek. It's eaten in multiple ways. So with this vegetation, shezara yerek, when it's planted for vegetables, mis asrin yerek v'zera. You give meiser both, whether or not you eat it as a vegetable or as a seed. Zara and zera mis asrin zera v'yerek. Either way, however you plant shachalayim and gargir, it's going to be chayiv and meiser. But the first part of the brayso was critical for us. You wanted to give me the answer. Chaziz, Rav says you're not allowed to be ma'ariv with chaziz in source number 1 and source number 2. He says, yes, you are. The Gemara answered, it depends. When, before he went to Bavel and after, asks the Gemara, batla daito eitzel kol adam. The fact that Bavel does it is not a strong enough reason. Answers the Gemara as we turn to the top of Kavches and Beis. Kika Amar Rab b'dagnu naisa. What were we talking about? Says Rashi on the top of Kavches and Beis. Dibur hamasel b'dagnu naisa bechaziz shegadal begina dekule alma achlelu. One version of the chaziz is a vegetation that nobody eats, and the other time that Rab said that chaziz couldn't be allowed is b'dagnu naisa. It's a version of chaziz that is allowed. Says the Gemara, Zora gargir lemay chazi, but gargir, we learned on the bottom in Rashi, we said that it's something that is eaten, Rashi says, bein zera uvein yarak. It's eaten either as a seed or as a tation. So says the Gemara, what's it good for? Nowadays, seemingly in their time, they didn't eat it so much. So Amar Rav Yochanan. Rav Yochanan answers this question in regards to what gargir was used for. Amar Rav Yochanan shekain rishonim, the early ones, seemingly a reference to the Tanaim. The rishonim, shelo haya lehen pilpulin, they didn't have pepper seeds to grind. Shochakino, so they would use gargir instead, umadbilin boas hatzli, and they would kind of spice up something that's roasted with it, and that was the use of the gargir. Then says the Gemara, a brief story about this. Says the Gemara, Reb Zera, ki have a chalish migir say, when Reb Zera at the end of the day when he was exhausted from learning, we're not talking about an hour of learning, we're talking about one of the greatest of the Amoraim who was pounding the books 20 some odd hours a day, however long it was. When he got exhausted, have a azal yasib a pischa de Rav Yehuda bar Ami. He would go sit by the opening of the yeshiva where Rabbi Yehuda bar Ami was giving shir. Omar, he said, he argued to himself, Kinafke va'ile Rabbanan, when the Rabbanim are gonna leave, I'll get schar, Eku mikamayhu ve'akabel b'hu agra. I'll be able to get the mitzvah of standing up in front of a Talmud Chacham. We know that this is the case, that if a person is a Talmud Chacham, so then the halacha is you have to stand up, not when they walk in the room. We do that socially, it's true. But Ladina, it's when they're within your Dalet Amos. And then Machlokas, Sfardim and Ashkenazim, is it twice a day? Is it every time? Okay, Ashkenazim are more lenient. You want to know what Kvod Rabbanim looks like? Hang out with Sfardim. They got it down cold. They're fantastic at it. Ashkenazim are not so stark. So that's what the Gemara says that Reb Zera was doing. So while he was sitting there, Nafak Asa Yinuka de Rab. There was a student there of Rabbi Yehuda bar Ami who walked out. And then Amar Le, Reb Zera said to the Talmud, "My Agmarach Rabcha. What did you learn today in yeshiva? What did your Rebbe teach you? Agmarach, from the word Gemara. What tradition, what Torah did you learn today?" Amar Le, we learned the following Hilchos Brachos. Kshos, in regards to shoots, Borei Periho Adama. Chaziz, that's our connection point, because we were just discussing how we understand Chaziz within the two versions of Ra. We said one was edible and one was not. Chaziz, Shehakol Niyeh Bidvaro. Whenever you see something that's growing out of the ground and it has the din of a shahakol, you're eating it wrong, right? If you eat bark off of a tree, it's shahakol, or it's nothing, whatever it is, but it's certainly not borei pri ha'etz, right? So there's a machlokes about this, about things that grow as a double derivative. We're going to discuss today Hearts of Palm. This is the Gemara for Hearts of Palm at the bottom of this page. As to what the bracha is, and the Gemara concludes one way, and we seem to paskin differently, but it'll all make sense by the time we finish, hopefully. So this is what the Talmud says. The kshos, that the shoots are borei pri hadama, but the chaziz is shahakol niyabidvaro. Amar le, Reb Zera yells back at the kid, Adarabba, ipcha mistabra. What is he teaching you? That doesn't make any sense. Hi, me'ara kamarbi, the hi me'avira kamarbi. I would have thought that the chaziz benefits from the ground should have been borei pri hadama. And the kshos, which benefits from the avira, from the air, like similar to mushrooms, I guess, at least from the Gemara's understanding, I would have thought that would have been the shehako. Says the Gemara, Reb Zera was wrong. The hilchasa, ki enuka de beirav. The halacha was like the child. The halacha was like the little kid who listened properly to Rabbi Yehuda bar Ami, who understood the kshos is borei pri hadam, the chaziz is shahakol. So says the Gemara, my taima. Says the Gemara, because ha gmar pirei, ha lav gmar pirei. They're both from the ground. One is ripe, one is not ripe. It's not a question of avira versus ara, like Reb Zera wanted to argue, but rather it was just a question of whether or not the food had finished ripening. That which Reb Zera wanted to argue, a distinction of whether or not each of these things, that the one benefited from the ara, which was what Reb Zera was saying about the chaziz, and that the kshos was benefiting from the avira, that's not correct. Kshos nami me ara karabi. Even the kshos that Reb Zera wanted to argue should have been shahakol because it benefits from the avira, not from the ara, says the Gemara, not correct. We have seen in regards to the kshos, that if you sever the bush from the ground, what happens? Then the shoots will die. What does that show you? Well, that it's not being yonik only from the air. It's not only from the avira. So just mitzias in botany, we disagree with Rav Zera's assumption. Rav Zera argued against the kid that the kshos must be avira. The haraya, we have the real deal. Go take a saw and cut the bottom of the bush from the ground and watch your kshus. It's not going to grow anymore. The haraya that Rav Zera is wrong and that the kid was right. Going back to our original statement of Rabbi Yehuda at the 2 dots on the previous page, he said that the kofnios ein ma'arvin. He said chaziz and kofnios that you cannot make an eruv. Now, as I glance back at this Rashi, I'll just reread it for you. What were the kofnios? So, what does Rashi say? Rashi says that they're tamarim ra'os shelo bishru kol tzorchan. These are dates that did not ripen. That's how Rashi explained this. Let's go back to where we are, halfway down, Kav Ches Amud Beis, coming toward the close for today. We're going to get until the last of the shortest lines on the page today. It says the Gemara, lost my space. Kor is the Gemara's words according to most for hearts of palm. Kor nikach bekesef meiser. You are allowed to buy hearts of palm with money that was transferred the kedusha upon that money with the food that you were supposed to bring to Yerushalayim. However, it doesn't have the status of tumas ochlin. You cannot be metame hearts of palm because it's not really a meichel. So that's what the havamina that it should be a shahakol, obviously, as we'll see soon. So it says the Gemara, what? Really? We'll see. We conclude that way in the Gemara. We don't pass in that way, the Dina, because things have changed, but the Metzias has changed. But that's what we'll see soon. That's going to be the Gemara's havamina. The Gemara's conclusion too. So we said that this Brisa writes first about hearts of palm and then about our case. What do we see about kafnios, about these dates? Not only can they be bought like with kesef meiser, just like hearts of palm, but they are metame tumas ochlen. What does that tell you about kafnios? They're food. So why does Rav say that you can't be ma'ariv with them? Great question from a Brisa. And the Brisa also continues, and we're going to get into this more. Rabbi Yehuda Omer, Kor, Harehu Ke'etz L'chol Dvarav Ela Shenikach B'Kesef Meiser. Really, and this is similar to the Tanakama, we're going to ask this question soon. This Brisa has a stira in it, because the Tanakama said that the Kor is Ein Matame Tumas Ochlin. Comes along Rabbi Yehuda and says, guess what? It's like a tree. Thank you. We already said it's not Matame Tumas Ochlin. So we're going to ask that question too. Ela Shenikach B'Kesef Meiser. But for whatever reasons, not for now, you're still allowed to buy the hearts of palm with Kesef Meiser. The Chofnio says, Rabbi Yehuda, hein kipri l'chol divrein, elashab turos mina meiser. They are considered fruits, but for whatever reason, they're excluded from meiser. Now, this is our question that we have on Rav. Rav, you wanted to tell me that Chofnios, you cannot be ma'ariv with them. Why not? L'chol hadeos, according to the Tanakama, and according to Rabbi Yehuda, they both agree that it's a food. So then why can't you be ma'ariv with it? Answers the Gemara, Hasam b'denischeni. This is a different type of food, b'denischeni, 3-4 inches above where we are, 1/3 of the way down in Rashi's. Dibur hamaschil b'denischeni. Rashi says, Tekalim zecharim, a male tree. Who knew? Tekalim zecharim, she'osin kofnios. They make these types of bad dates. Ve'enan osin tmarim le'olam. They don't make dates ever. V'chofnios hu gmar piran. This is the final version of that particular fruit. The lotinosan b'nisan, the hanhu uchlaninu. They are considered food. So says the Gemara, what is this distinction between Rav? What was Rav talking about? Rav was talking about Tekalim Nekevos. And the Bryce is talking about the kalim zacharim, different types of trees, and therefore different types of fruits. I was not aware of gender references for trees. With anyone? No? I've never heard of such a thing.
Maybe it's from here.
Maybe it's from here. Well, you've been through Shas before, so that's reasonable. I don't.
The concept is when they graft trees, that's sort of the concept.
When what?
When they graft trees, I think that's sort of the concept.
Fascinating. I had no idea until I saw this Rashi, and I thought I was misreading it, so I reread it a few times to make sure I wasn't overly tired, because it didn't click with me. Trees are trees; they grow. Seed goes in the ground, tree grows, makes fruit. I just didn't think much about it.
Oh.
Says the Gemara, whatever the distinction is, it's a question of the fruits, really. I mean, Rashi is giving the language here of dekalim zacharim, dekalim nekevos. Nevertheless, that's the Gemara's answer. So says the Gemara, ihachi, if it's true that we have different types of trees, that we have dekalim zacharim and dekalim nekevos, then ihachi beha lemar of Yehuda pturos min hamaiser. You look back in this brisa, we said that you're pater from maiser. Why would you be pater from maiser, Rabbi Yehuda? If this is the regular way that fruit grows on that tree, why is it pater from maiser? I understand you want to argue that maybe it's an ochel, maybe it's not an ochel by the hearts of Paul. I got it. But once you say it's a food, why is it pater from maiser? I don't understand. Says the Gemara, v'hatanya, let's make the question still stronger. Amar Rabbi Yehuda himself. Lohuzkiru page by tiyuni, these are also unripe dates. Ella le'inyan maiser bilvad. Pagi by tiyuni ve'ahini de tuvina, these are two types of unripe dates. Chayavin b'maiser. So I don't understand. You yourself wrote this, you're quoted in a brisa saying this as well. So now we have Rabbi Yehuda and two brisas that don't agree with one another. So says the Gemara, elalav la'olam b'nischani. Really, we are talking about these different types of trees. Ula'inyan tumas ochlin shiny. But the distinction to be made here is about tumas ochlin. And when it comes to tumas ochlin, the discussion of tumas ochlin cannot be extrapolated to the world of meiser. They're different topics. And let's see how it plays out. So says the Gemara, Kid Amar Rabbi Yochanan, Hol v'ro'il l'misakin al yidei ha'or, Hachanami, Hol v'yachol l'misakin al yidei ha'or. Because we could prepare these foods in a different way, so then whether or not they're going to be tameh or whether or not they're going to be meiser it's the meiser here, that's going to be dependent on whether or not it could be cooked. So that's the distinction to be made. So why it's not ready for meiser in one case, because one can't be prepared with fire. Says the Gemara, where did this sheet of Rabbi Yochanan come from? It wasn't on our sugya. So the Gemara wants to know, just give me some background. Where is this story, this psak of Rabbi Yochanan, the distinction of that which can be prepared by heat that we're using to explain the difference between these two versions of Rabbi Yehuda about why there's no meiser in one case, because the food can't be prepared with or? Where do we see that? Says the Gemara, aha. We have it on the following case. The Tanya, the Brisa writes, Shkedin hamarim. If you have bitter shkedim, bitter almonds, ktanim chayavin, the small ones will be chayev, gedolim paturim, the large ones will not be because the small ones are expected to be the flavor that way, and the gedolim are not expected to be the flavor that way. The sukim, what if they're sweet? Then the gedolim are chayev, and the ktanim are paturim. Then their appropriate flavors, the gadol is going to be chayev because that's where the flavor is correct, and the ktanim, they don't have the right flavor, so they're pater. Continuing the brayser, Rav Shimon Rav Yossi Omer Mishum Aviv Zev Zev pater. I disagree. In both cases, they're going to be pater. But Amrei La, and some say that Rav Shimon ben Yossi said the other way, Zev Zev L'chiyuv. So Amar Rabbi La, Hora Reb Chanina b'Tzipori Kedivrei HaOmer Zev Zev pater Liftor, that both of them are going to be pater from Meiser. Ulamanda Amar Zev Zev L'chiyuv L'may Chazi. According to the one who says that both of them are going to be chiyuv. So then, what is this food's not edible? So what do you mean Zev, that you're going to be chayav Meiser on both? Answers the Gemara. This is where Rav Yochanan comes in. Rav Yochanan, that's where we see that where something can be cooked to perfection, it's still shayach by meiser. Interesting idea that it still could be included in meiser. Last sugya for the day and halacha l'maisa. We keep our house stocked with hearts of palm all the time. Amar Mar. Rabbi Yehuda Omer Kor Hareu Ke'es L'chol Dvarav El Shenikach B'Kesef Meiser. We saw in the brisa above that Rabbi Yehuda was of the opinion that hearts of palm is like a tree L'chol Dvarav, except that it is something that can be purchased with Kesef Meiser. The only problem is Hainu Tanakama, as I already highlighted. The earlier part of that brisa was the Tanakama. Everyone agrees in that brisa that Kor you can buy with Kesef Meiser, but it's not a vegetation really. It's an exception to the rule that you can use Kesef Meiser. But everyone seems to agree. So then, Hainu Tanakama. Why did Rabbi Yehuda have to repeat his opinion about Kor, about hearts of palm? Should have stayed quiet because everyone would have agreed with the same din. Kesef Meiser, yes. Is it a vegetable? No. Fine. So then says the Gemara, Amar Abaye, Shlako v'tignu ika beinayu. The difference between Rabbi Yehuda and the Tana Kama is when it is cooked and when it is fried. Rashi to our left, about an inch above where we are, inch and a half above where we are. In Rashi, Dibur Hamaschil, v'tigno, go down one line in that Rashi. He says, B'shemen, fried, Bilaz, fried, right? That's a similar language. And then Rashi says, the Rabbi Yehuda, who was the question we asked upon him, why bother repeating your opinion? Afilu shlako v'tigno eino metame. Even if you boil it, and even if it's edible, don't care, it's not a food. You can't make it susceptible to tumah. L'tanakama, im shlako v'tigno metame, delo amre harehu ke'etz. The language of Rabbi Yehuda of harehu ke'etz, he takes it all the way to the bank. That even if you can make it soft and edible, I don't care. You are not allowed to make that food into a food. And the bracha, well, we didn't get to the bracha yet, but we would say that it is something that's not shaykh by edibility, even if it were to be cooked. So maskif la Rabbi, what kind of answer is that? Mi'ika lamanda amar shlako v'tignu lo. You think that Rabbi Yehuda would say that even if I could cook it to perfection, that it's not a food? It's a delicacy at that point. Who doesn't like it? It tastes great. It says the Gemara, ve'atanya, I can bring you a raya. Or if you have leather ve'ashilya and an afterbirth, ein metam tumas ochla. However, or sheshlako v'shilya shechishe baleha. If you have leather that was boiled and shilya shechishe baleha, metam tumas ochla. If you prepare these foods to be eaten, they can be eaten. You just got to prepare them the right way. What do we see? That when you boil something, it can be edible. How can Rabbi Yehuda say that when you boil the hearts of palm and prepare it, that it's not edible? So then the Gemara says, you're right. Let's go back to what seems to be a simple discussion, which is, Ella Amar Rava Ika Beinaihu. What is the difference between the Tana Kama and Rabbi Yehuda, who seem to say the same thing about hearts of palm, that they're nikne bekesef meiser, that they can be purchased with kesef meiser, but that they are not considered a meichel? Says the Gemara, Ika Beinaihu bracha. The nafkamina is what bracha do we make? The itmar, the Amoraim discuss. Kor, don't get confused here. This Rabbi Yehuda is an Amora because we have the word itmar. Itmar is always an indication of Amoraic statements. So itmar kor, Rabbi Yehuda omer bore priho adama. Rabbi Yehuda says the bracha is bore priho adama. Shmuel omer she'akol nihya bidvaro. Shmuel is of the opinion that we say shehakol. Rabbi Yehuda omer amar bore priho adama uchlahi. Because right now, cut the tree in half, soft fruit in the middle, soft vegetable in the middle, hearts of palm. I'm hungry, looks good, tastes good, salty, I'm going to eat it. No problem at all. It's an ochel right now. Ushmuel amar she'akol nihya bidvaro. Kiven shesofo lahakshos lo mevarchinu niliyah bore priho adama. So that's what the Gemara says, why it should be a shehakol, because at the end of, right now it's edible, but in due time, if you don't cut down that palm tree in order to harvest that hearts of palm, it will become as hard as the tree itself. And sometimes I might add that if you eat hearts of palm, you'll find a hearts of palm that's very hard on the outside. It started to harden a little bit. So then it should be a shehakol. So Amar le Shmuel Rabbi Yehuda, Shinana, Shmuel, it's funny because Shmuel was arguing with Rabbi Yehuda. Shmuel said shehakol, and Rabbi Yehuda said Borei Pri Adama. Shmuel was the dissenting opinion. He says, Shinana, you're the bright one. Kavasech mistabra. I actually agree with you. Why? Because it's known, radish, shesofo lahakshos, it's going to become very hard if you don't eat it. What do we see? Umevarchinan alei Borei Pri Adama. So says the Gemara, Shmuel argues on himself. What was Rabbi Yehuda's argument? Borei Pri Adama, because it's edible. So what does Shmuel say? It hardens, it's going to be shehakol. What about a radish? So Shmuel says, I think I'm wrong. I think you're right. And then the Gemara says, no, Velohi, the argument of Shmuel is not good because it's known, not a inishadaita de pugla. The reason why people plant the radishes is to eat them when they're soft. However, dikla, palm trees, lo nite inche adaita de kura. But people don't plant palm trees for the sake of hearts of palm. Even though Shmuel did praise Rabbi Yehuda for his svara because of the radish argument, Hilchasa Kavase the Shmuel, the halacha is like Shmuel that the bracha on hearts of palm is shehakol nihya bidvaro. However, we have to pay attention to this Gemara because this is a distinction made by the poskim. Why did we say that Shmuel's right? We said he's right because we don't plant trees for these reasons, but for this food. We don't plant trees for hearts of palm, but what if you did? Because we do. These are full farms wherever they grow them in some beautiful climate. Full farms that are hearts of palm farms, and they make a killing on it because people like us in America eat hearts of palms. We get it sliced, we get it diced, we get them whole. We can pick how we want it, glass jars, metal cans, whatever you want. The world is yours, pick. So there, the poskim write that because the Gemara brings a svara as to why Shmuel's right, which is that you didn't plant the tree for that way. You didn't plant the tree for that reason. So therefore, if you plant the tree for that reason, the bracha changes. We paskin Medina this way. The bracha on hearts of palm is Borei Priha Adama, and we will stop here for the evening tomorrow night. Yirtzeh Hashem Daf Chav Tes in Eruvin. Have a beautiful night.